Now, to give us more perspective in terms of what is happening at this moment, we're being joined by Mr. Dov Zakheim, who's a former Undersecretary of Defense in George W. Bush's administration and is currently a senior advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies, and he's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Mr. Zakheim, the humanitarian pause that is presently underway and that is getting extended every 24 hours hangs by a thread. The question that a lot of people, of course, would want to know an answer for is how long do you think the Netanyahu administration would be willing to continue with this military pause to exchange hostages for prisoners?
My guess is that they will continue to do this for as long as they think they can get hostages out. Remember, and you mentioned this a few moments ago, there are still 140 some odd hostages still in the hands of Hamas. And so clearly there could be quite a bit longer truce, which would do a number of things. First, it would bring the hostages back. Second of all, it would allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza. Now, a lot of people worry that the Hamas people could reconstitute, but I think it would be rather difficult to reconstitute the kind of capability they had in a matter of a couple of weeks. So at least for the time being, even though there was this tragedy in Jerusalem today, nevertheless, as long as there are hostages that can be released and that Hamas is prepared to release, I think the Israelis will continue to go ahead and release 3 Palestinian prisoners for every hostage that they can bring home.
Right. Now, you've been a former Undersecretary of the Department of Defense in George Bush's administration, so you know how the levers of power work within the American administration. Now, the United States has been pretty forceful in telling its close ally Israel that it did not go ahead with its ground offensive in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Now, the expectation is once this military pause that is presently underway ends, Israel would want to renew its military offensive that will be focused on the southern part of the Gaza Strip. To what extent do you think the Americans would in fact back the Israelis if there were to be an offensive in the southern part of Gaza?
I think it very much, by the way, I have to correct myself, there are 170 hostages still in Hamas hands, not 140. To answer your question, clearly we, the United States, are going to push the Israelis to minimize casualties. Now, the 15,000 number that you quoted, of course, comes from Hamas sources, but there's no doubt, whether Hamas is exaggerating or not, that thousands have been killed, including, of course, women and children. We will press the Israelis to minimize what is called in military terms collateral damage, which is a very antiseptic term for killing innocent people. The Israelis, of course, could target their attacks more carefully. After all said and done, so many Gazans have now been displaced to the south, so it's even more concentrated than it was before. The Israelis could also do something else, and at least there have been some reports to that effect, that they could go after the Hamas leadership. Somebody like, for instance, Sinwar, who is the brains behind this attack, it seems. So they have some options, and of course it very much depends on how this all starts. If the truce is broken by, say, Islamic Jihad, then the Israelis are going to retaliate. If the truce holds, then more and more hostages will be released and more Palestinians will be released, and more humanitarian assistance will come in. The trucks are lining up. So one hopes that the truce will continue, but even if it does not, I think Jerusalem would be wise to do what it can to accommodate concerns that even President Biden, who has been such a staunch supporter of the Israeli campaign, even he has made it clear that you cannot simply have widespread bombing.
I think that's a crucial and an important point. And of course, Secretary Blinken is in his 3rd trip to West Asia. Do you think this time around he can actually have more leverage in terms of how Israel continues with its campaign further?
Well, ultimately, the Israelis are going to make that decision themselves for the very simple reason that they see this as an existential threat. The mistake they made over the past 20 years was to assume that somehow Hamas could be accommodated. It's clear it cannot be. So, to some extent, Blinken's leverage is limited. On the other hand, he is so close to the President of the United States. He is speaking for the President of the United States, and Netanyahu would be wise to take into account what Blinken tells him.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Dafzar Khan, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.